The summer heat hit Bakersfield like a hammer against an anvil. Route 99 shimmered under the merciless California sun, the asphalt soft enough to leave boot prints, the air thick enough to choke on. Out here on the forgotten shoulder of the highway, where the desert crept right up to the edge of civilization, sat Locke's Diner, a relic of better days, its neon sign flickering weakly against the glare of midday. Ezra Kilpatrick stood behind the counter, thin as a reed, all sharp angles and hollow cheeks. 18 years old and 5'9", but barely 140 pounds soaking wet. His apron hung loose on his frame, stained with grease and coffee, his hands raw from scrubbing dishes in water hot enough to blister. He moved through the diner like a ghost refilling coffee cups, clearing plates invisible to everyone except when they needed something. The bell above the door chimed. Ezra glanced up, then back down at the table he was wiping. Another trucker, probably. Another black coffee, another burger, another $2 tip if he was lucky. But the footsteps were wrong. Too heavy, too slow. Ezra looked up again. The man who stumbled through the door was a giant. 6'5", easily 280 pounds, shoulders broad enough to block out the sun. He wore black leather, a vest cut that caught the light, emblazoned with patches Ezra recognized instantly. The death head grinned from the center, skeletal and defiant. Hell's Angels, California rocker beneath it. The giant's face was the color of old newspaper. His skin sheened with cold sweat despite the 105-degree heat. He gripped the edge of the door frame like it was the only thing keeping him upright, his chest heaving with shallow, desperate breaths. Ezra froze, the wet rag still in his hand. The man staggered forward, one massive hand reaching for the nearest table. His fingers slipped. He caught himself on the back of a chair, his weight nearly toppling it. His eyes rolled back, showing white. Behind the counter, Sterling Locke looked up from the register. 70 years old, white hair cropped military short, his face carved from leather and hard decisions. He saw the patch on the man's back, and his expression shifted, recognition flickering across his weathered features. Sterling knew this man. 2 years ago, Sterling's grandson, barely 16, had been trapped in a house fire on the east side of town. Neighbors stood in the street watching the flames, waiting for the fire department. This man, this Hell's Angel, had kicked down the door and carried the boy out through the smoke, his own hands blistered and bleeding. He'd never asked for thanks, never gave his name, just climbed back on his Harley and rode away. Sterling moved towards him now, but the giant was already falling. He collapsed into the corner booth, his head lolling back against the cracked vinyl. His breathing was ragged, erratic. His hands trembled violently as they fumbled in his pockets, searching for something he couldn't find. Ezra's heart hammered against his ribs. He should walk away, mind his business. This was a Hell's Angel, for God's sake. These were dangerous men, men his mother had warned him about his entire life. But something in the way the giant's hands shook, something in the desperate animal panic in his eyes, pulled Ezra forward. He approached the booth slowly, hands visible, non-threatening. The man didn't even register his presence. His fingers were still searching, frantic now, patting down pockets that were clearly empty. Ezra knelt down beside the booth. Up close, he could see the man's lips were tinged blue. His pupils were dilated, unfocused. His skin was cold and clammy to the touch. Ezra had seen this before. 5 years ago, his father, Connor Kilpatrick, lying in a pool of blood on a construction site. The same pale skin, the same shallow breathing, the same terrible stillness in the eyes of a man whose body was shutting down. Connor had fallen 3 stories when the scaffolding gave way. Snapped ribs, punctured lung, internal bleeding. He'd lain there for 20 minutes while his coworkers stood around, too scared to move, him too panicked to know what to do. By the time the ambulance arrived, Connor was gone. Ezra had been 13, old enough to understand that his father had died alone, surrounded by people but alone. He would not let that happen again. Ezra reached for the man's vest, fingers brushing the leather. The giant's eyes flickered toward him, confused, unfocused. Ezra found the inner pocket, felt the bulge of a wallet. He pulled it out, flipped it open. Driver's license, Garrett McCullister, organ donor card, and behind that a small white card with red lettering. Type 1 diabetes, insulin dependent. In case of emergency, administer glucose immediately. Ezra's throat tightened. He looked up at Sterling. Call 911, he's in diabetic shock. Sterling was already moving the old rotary phone in his gnarled hands. Ezra turned back to Garrett to Bear as the patch on his chest read. The man's eyes were closing. His breaths were coming further apart. "Stay with me," Ezra said, his voice low urgent. "Stay with me. Help's coming." Bear's lips moved. No sound came out. Ezra grabbed a napkin, dipped it in ice water from the dispenser, pressed it against Bear's forehead. It was a useless gesture, he knew, but it was something. It was not standing by and watching. The bell above the door chimed again. Ezra didn't look up. He kept his hand on Bear's shoulder, willing the man to hold on, willing the ambulance to hurry. But the footsteps that entered were not paramedics. They were loud, swaggering, 3 sets of them moving in lockstep like a pack. "Well, well, well!" The voice was young, cocky, dripping with contempt. "Look what we got here!" Ezra's stomach dropped. He knew that voice. He turned slowly. Chase Calloway stood in the center of the diner, flanked by 2 shadows. Trent on his left, linebacker, thick neck like a tree stump. Mason on his right, all wiry muscle and cruel eyes. Chase himself was quarterback perfect. Square jaw, blonde hair, the kind of smile that looked good in yearbook photos and hid something rotten underneath. 20 years old, star of the Bakersfield Community College football team. Son of Vaughn Calloway, the man who owned half the city. Chase's eyes locked onto Bear, slumped in the booth, helpless. Then they slid to the death head patch on his back. Chase's smile widened. "Big bad biker," he said, his voice loud enough to fill the small diner. "Looking a little pathetic today, aren't we, Grandpa?" Bear's head rolled slightly. His eyes tried to focus on Chase, but couldn't. Chase stepped closer, his shadow falling over the booth. "Hey," he said sharply, "I'm talking to you." Bear's lips moved. A dry rasp escaped, barely audible. Chase's face twisted. His father's Porsche clipped by a rogue biker 8 years ago. Chase had been 12. He'd watched his father scream at the rider, watched the man flip them off and speed away. Chase had nursed that hatred ever since, a festering wound that had never healed. And now here was one of them, vulnerable, weak, helpless. "You guys think you own the roads," Chase said, his voice rising. "Think you can do whatever you want. What's wrong?" "Forget how to ride," Trent snickered. Mason grinned. Ezra's hands curled into fists. His heart pounded so hard he could feel it in his throat. "Leave him alone," he heard himself say. The words came out quiet, almost a whisper. Chase turned slowly. His eyes found Ezra kneeling beside the booth, skinny and insignificant, in his grease-stained apron. "What did you say, busboy?" Ezra's mouth was dry. His hands were shaking. He'd gone to high school with Chase, suffered 2 years of torment, shoved into lockers, tripped in hallways. His lunch tray knocked to the floor while the cafeteria laughed. Trailer trash, Chase had called him. Worthless. Nothing. Ezra knew exactly what Chase was capable of. But he looked down at Bear, at this massive man reduced to trembling weakness, and he thought of his father, lying in blood, alone. "I said leave him alone." Ezra's voice was louder now, steadier. "He's sick. Can't you see that?" Chase's jaw tightened. He took a step toward Ezra, closing the distance. "Mind your business, trash," Chase said, his voice low and dangerous. "Go wash a dish before I break your jaw." He turned back to Bear, lifted his hand, and shoved the giant's shoulder hard. Bear, barely conscious, slid sideways off the slick vinyl seat. His body hit the linoleum floor with a sickening thud, 280 pounds of dead weight. He lay there gasping, his eyes rolling back, showing white. Chase laughed. He pulled his foot back, steel-toed boot aimed at Bear's ribs. Ezra didn't think. He launched himself forward, his thin frame crashing into Chase's legs. Both of them went down in a tangle of limbs, hitting the floor hard. The impact knocked the wind out of Ezra's lungs. Pain exploded across his shoulder. Chase recovered instantly. His athletic frame, honed by years of training, overpowered Ezra in seconds. He rolled, pinning Ezra beneath him, and drove his fist straight into Ezra's face. The punch landed on his cheekbone. White-hot pain. Ezra's vision blurred. He tasted copper, thick and metallic. Trent and Mason moved in, circling like hyenas. Chase hit him again. This time the mouth. Ezra felt his lips split open, blood pouring down his chin. He tried to scramble up, tried to get to his feet, but his only thought was, Bear, get to Bear, protect him. Ezra crawled toward the fallen, borrowing biker, his body screaming in protest. He threw himself over Bear's head, arms wrapped around the man's skull, shielding him. Chase's boot caught Ezra in the ribs. Once. Twice. The pain was blinding, a sharp crack that stole his breath. Ezra curled into a ball, but he didn't move away from Bear. He couldn't. Another kick. This one to his shoulder. Ezra screamed, but his arms stayed locked around Bear's head. The beating seemed to last forever. Each impact sent fresh agony through Ezra's body. His ribs, his back, his legs. Chase was methodical, brutal, enjoying every second. Trent grabbed Ezra's arm, tried to pull him away from Bear. Ezra held on his fingers, digging into the linoleum. Mason kicked at Ezra's hands. The pain was excruciating, but Ezra refused to let go. Chase raised his boot again, aiming for Ezra's head this time. "Stop!" Sterling's voice cut through the chaos, high and desperate. He stood behind the counter, the landline phone held up like a weapon. "The police are on their way. I called them. They're coming right now." In the distance, faint but growing louder, the wail of sirens rose. Chase froze his boot inches from Ezra's temple. His face went white. A police record would destroy his scholarship. His father could buy a lot of things, but not his way out of assault charges with witnesses and 911 recordings. "You're dead, Kilpatrick," Chase spat, wiping sweat from his forehead. "Watch your back." He turned and bolted for the door. Trent and Mason followed their footsteps, pounding across the linoleum. The bell chimed violently as they shoved through. Outside tires squealed as they peeled out of the parking lot. Ezra stayed on the floor, gasping through the agony in his ribs. Each breath felt like knives. He looked down at Bear. The biker's eyes flickered open just for a moment. Hazy, confused. They locked onto Ezra, onto this battered, bleeding teenager who had just taken a beating for him. Bear's lips moved. No sound came out. But Ezra saw the question in his eyes. Why Ezra didn't have an answer. He just knew he couldn't stand by and watch someone die. Not again. 10 minutes later, paramedics loaded Bear onto a stretcher. They hooked him up to an IV dextrose, flooding into his system, pulling him back from the edge of a diabetic coma. His color was already returning, his breathing steadying. As the ambulance doors prepared to close, Bear weakly raised one massive, calloused hand toward Ezra. Ezra sat on the bumper of a police cruiser, holding a bag of frozen peas to his rapidly swelling eye. His ribs throbbed with every breath. His lip was split wide, still bleeding. Blood had soaked through his apron, dripped onto his jeans. He met Bear's gaze. It wasn't a wave. It wasn't a thank you. It was an acknowledgement, a promise. The ambulance doors slammed shut. The siren wailed. The vehicle pulled away, disappearing down Route 99. Sterling stood beside Ezra, his hand on the boy's shoulder. The old man's face was pale, his hands trembling slightly. "You did good, son," the old man said quietly. Ezra didn't answer. He just stared down at his hands, at the blood on his knuckles, at the trembling he couldn't stop. He'd done the right thing. He knew that. But as the adrenaline faded and the pain set in, all Ezra could think was how much this was going to cost him. 3 days crawled by like broken glass dragged across skin. The California heat didn't break. Neither did Ezra's misfortune. Every breath was a reminder. His ribs screamed in protest, with each movement a sharp, stabbing pain that radiated from his right side. The bruises had bloomed into ugly shades of purple and yellow, spreading across his torso like spilled ink. His left eye was still swollen, half shut, the skin around it tender to the touch. Louise Kilpatrick had wept when she saw him. She'd begged him to go to the emergency room. Her voice breaking, her hands shaking as she tried to examine his injuries in the dim light of their trailer. Ezra had refused. Stubborn, stupid maybe, but the math was simple. They didn't have insurance. They didn't have the cash for x-rays or CT scans. Every penny was already earmarked for rent, for utilities, for the insulin Louise needed to keep her diabetes in check. So Ezra had taped his ribs himself, tight against his torso, the way he'd seen in a YouTube video. He'd popped ibuprofen, like candy, and returned to his grueling routine. Locke's Diner in the morning. Washing cars in the afternoon heat. Night classes at Bakersfield Community College, fighting to stay awake through lectures on American history and intro to business. He bore it all on his narrow shoulders because there was no one else to carry the weight. If Ezra thought Chase Calloway would let the humiliation slide, he was tragically mistaken. Chase was furious. His ego, fragile and venomous as a rattlesnake, couldn't handle the shame of running from a nobody. A scrawny busboy he considered beneath him. someone he'd spent 2 years of high school grinding into the dirt. At Bakersfield Community College, Chase made it his mission to reassert dominance. He stalked the hallways with Trent and Mason casting dark looks, waiting for the perfect moment, waiting for when the witnesses were scarce. It came on a Thursday evening. The campus parking lot was nearly empty, bathed in the sickly yellow glow of a single sodium lamp. Long shadows stretched across the cracked asphalt. Ezra was exhausted, his body aching, his mind foggy from pain and lack of sleep. He approached his bicycle, a battered 10-speed he'd bought 2 months ago for $180. Money he'd earned selling plasma at the clinic on East Street. It wasn't much, but it was his only transportation between the diner, the car wash school, and the trailer park. Ezra bent down to unlock the chain. A heavy hand grabbed the back of his collar, yanked him upright, and slammed him into the rough brick wall. The air rushed out of his lungs. His vision blurred. The bike lock clattered to the pavement. Chase's face appeared inches from his own eyes, blazing with malicious intent. Trent and Mason flanked him, blocking any escape. "Thought you were a hero, didn't you?" Chase hissed, his forearm pressing against Ezra's throat. "Thought you could embarrass me in front of my friends and just walk away." Ezra's hands clawed weakly at Chase's arm. He couldn't breathe. Black spots danced at the edges of his vision. "I didn't do anything," he choked out. "You got in my way," Chase growled, his face twisted with rage. "You protected a piece of biker trash. Now I'm going to teach you a permanent lesson about where you belong in this town." Chase stepped back, releasing the pressure on Ezra's throat. Ezra gasped, sucking in air. His legs nearly gave out. Chase nodded to Mason. Mason grinned, stepping forward. He grabbed Ezra's 10-speed, lifted it high over his head, and brought it smashing down onto the concrete curb. The sound was sickening, metal bending, spokes snapping. Mason stomped on the front wheel again and again until the rim folded completely in half. The frame twisted into useless wreckage. Ezra stared, his throat closed up. That bike was everything. Without it, the fragile house of cards that was his life would collapse. He couldn't get to work on time. Without work, eviction was a certainty. "Walk home, hero," Chase sneered, dusting off his hands. "And if you ever cross my path again, I'll put you in the hospital next to your dead biker boyfriend." They sauntered away, their laughter echoing across the empty parking lot. Ezra slid slowly down the brick wall, pulling his knees to his chest. He stared at the mangled wreckage of his bicycle, his vision blurring. Tears pricked his eyes. He wiped them away furiously with his sleeve. He was alone, completely, utterly alone, crushed under the weight of a system rigged against him. The police hadn't helped. Sterling had tried, but fear had made him erase the footage. Louise couldn't fight this battle. She could barely keep herself upright. Ezra had done the right thing. He'd stood up for someone who couldn't stand up for themselves. And this was his reward. He sat there in the dark for a long time, listening to the distant hum of traffic on Route 99, feeling the cold concrete seep through his jeans. Then slowly he stood. His ribs screamed, his face throbbed. But his mind was clear. He pulled out his phone, cracked screen, glowing in the darkness, opened Google, typed Bakersfield Hell's Angels address. The result came up immediately: 2847 Oak Street. Ezra stared at the address for a long moment. Then he started walking. 12 miles. Through the industrial district, past the rail yards. Into the part of town where the streetlights were sparse and the buildings were old. Ezra walked the entire night. By the time the sun began to rise, painting the sky in shades of bruised orange, he stood outside a chain-link fence topped with barbed wire. Behind it, a low concrete building, its walls painted black. Motorcycles lined up in perfect rows. Harley-Davidson's gleaming chrome catching the early light. A sign above the gate read, "Private property. No trespassing." Ezra's legs trembled. Exhaustion and pain warred with the adrenaline still pumping through his veins. He stepped up to the gate. Two men emerged from the shadows. Both in their late 30s, heavily tattooed, wearing leather cuts with the death head patch. One had a thick beard streaked with gray. The other was bald, a scar running down his left cheek. They stopped a few feet from the fence, arms crossed, eyes cold. "Lost kid," the bald one said. His voice was like gravel. Ezra's throat was dry. He swallowed hard. "I need to speak to Garrett McCullister," he said, his voice cracked. He cleared his throat, tried again. "I'm Ezra Kilpatrick. I'm the one who helped him at Locke's Diner 4 days ago." The two men exchanged a glance. The bearded one stepped closer to the fence, eyes narrowing as he studied Ezra. He saw the black eye, the split lip, the way Ezra held his ribs. "You walked here?" the bearded man asked. "Yes." "From where? Campus? 12 miles. Another glance between them. The bald one pulled out a radio, spoke into it quietly. Ezra couldn't make out the words. A minute passed, then two, then the gate rattled open. The bearded man gestured. Inside. Ezra stepped through, his heart hammered against his bruised ribs. They led him across the yard past the rows of motorcycles toward the black building. The door was heavy steel. It swung open with a groan. Inside, the air was thick with cigarette smoke and the smell of oil. A long bar ran along one wall, pool table in the corner. A handful of men sat at tables drinking coffee, talking in low voices. All of them wore the cut. All of them turned to look as Ezra entered. The room went silent. Then from the back, a figure rose. Garrett McCullister. Bear. He looked healthy now, color back in his face, eyes clear. But when he saw Ezra, his expression shifted. Shock. Then something harder to read. Bear crossed the room in 3 long strides. Ezra stood his ground even though every instinct screamed at him to run. Bear stopped in front of him, looked down at the battered teenager, at the black eye, the split lip, the way Ezra held himself favoring his left side. "You came here alone." Bear's voice was a low rumble. "Yes." "Why?" Ezra met his gaze, held it. "Because the system failed me," Ezra said. "The police buried the evidence. The people who did this," he gestured to his face, "they're going to get away with it because their father owns half this city." Bear's jaw tightened. "You said Hell's Angels live by honor." Ezra continued, his voice steady now. "I didn't save your life to get something in return, but I need you to be a witness, not for me, for every other kid out there who's getting crushed by people like them." The room was silent. Every eye in the place was on Ezra. Then from the shadows at the back of the room, another figure stepped forward. Randall Kavanaugh, Ironside, 58 years old, silver hair cut short, a long scar running down the left side of his face from temple to jaw. He moved with the quiet authority of a man who didn't need to raise his voice to command respect. He stopped beside Bear, his cold eyes studying Ezra. "You walked 12 miles in the middle of the night," Ironside said slowly, "beat to hell to ask us for help." "To ask you to do what's right," Ezra corrected. Ironside's lips twitched, almost a smile. He looked at Bear. "This the kid, yes." Ironside turned back to Ezra. "You know who did this to you. Chase Calloway, son of Vaughn Calloway." A murmur rippled through the room. The name carried weight. Vaughn Calloway owned real estate all over Kern County. He had the police chief in his pocket, the city council, half the judges. Ironside nodded slowly. "And you think we can help you take on a man like that?" Ezra's hands curled into fists. "I think you're the only ones who will." Silence. Then Ironside extended his hand. Ezra stared at it, then slowly reached out and shook it. Ironside's grip was iron. He held Ezra's hand for a long moment, his eyes locked onto the boy's. "Debt of blood," Ironside said quietly. "You stood up for one of ours when you had nothing to gain. Now we stand up for you." He released Ezra's hand and turned to the room. "Brothers," he said, his voice carrying effortlessly, "meet Ezra Kilpatrick, the boy who saved Bear's life." 20 men rose to their feet as one. They nodded, a gesture of respect that Ezra had never received in his life. Bear said that, bent forward, and placed a massive hand on Ezra's shoulder. "You asked why," Bear said softly. "At the diner. You wanted to know why I was looking at you like that." Ezra nodded. "I was wondering," Bear continued, "what kind of man throws himself in front of a beating to protect a stranger? Now I know, the kind who doesn't wait to be saved, the kind who fights back." He squeezed Ezra's shoulder gently. "You came here asking for help," Bear said, "but I think you came here for something else." "What?" "To learn how to fight." Ezra swallowed hard. "Yes," Ironside stepped forward again. "Then that's what we'll teach you. But first you need to understand something." He gestured to the room, to the men standing around them. "We don't just protect people," Ironside said. "We protect family. And family doesn't mean blood. It means the people willing to bleed for each other." He looked Ezra in the eye. You bled for us. Now you're family, which means when someone comes for you, they come for all of us. Ezra felt something crack open in his chest, a dam he'd been holding back for 5 years, since his father died, since his mother got sick, since he'd been carrying the weight of survival alone. He wasn't alone anymore. Bear pulled him into a crushing embrace. Ezra winced his ribs, protesting, but he didn't pull away. When Bear released him, Ironside gestured toward the back of the room. Come on, he said. Let's figure out what we're dealing with. They sat around a scarred wooden table. Ezra told them everything. Chase, Trent, Mason, the attack at the diner, the destroyed bicycle, the police chief who'd buried the evidence. Bear listened, his face growing darker with every word. When Ezra finished, Ironside leaned back in his chair. Vaughn Calloway, he said thoughtfully. That name's been on our radar for a while. Man's dirty. We just haven't had cause to dig into him. He looked at Bear. Now we do. Bear nodded. Ironside turned back to Ezra. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to keep going to school, keep going to work, live your life. But you're not doing it alone anymore. He gestured to the room. From now on, there's always someone watching. You won't see them, but they'll be there. And if Chase or his friends come near you again, they'll wish they hadn't. Ezra's throat tightened. I don't want charity. It's not charity, Ironside said firmly. It's a debt. We owe you, and we always pay our debts. He stood the meeting clearly over. Bear, he said, get the kid home and find out what he needs. Bear nodded. He looked down at Ezra. You got a way to get to work tomorrow. Ezra shook his head. My bike's destroyed. Not anymore, Bear said. An hour later, Ezra sat on the back of Bear's Harley-Davidson, a spare helmet on his head, his arms wrapped around the giant's waist. They roared down Route 99, the early morning sun climbing higher, the wind whipping past them. Ezra had never been on a motorcycle before. The power beneath him was terrifying and exhilarating all at once. When they pulled up in front of Oak Hill's trailer park, Louise rushed out of their unit, her face pale with panic. She froze when she saw the motorcycle, the death head patch on Bear's back. Bear cut the engine, removed his helmet, helped Ezra down. Louise ran forward, pulling Ezra into her arms, tears streaming down her face. Where have you been? She cried. I thought something happened. I'm okay, Mom, Ezra said softly. I'm okay. Bear stepped forward. Despite his size, his voice was gentle when he addressed Louise. Ma'am, he said, your son is a very brave young man. He saved my life. I owe him everything. Louise stared up at him, her eyes red and swollen. Bear reached into his cut and pulled out a thick envelope. He held it out to her. What is this? She whispered. We know Ezra's bicycle was destroyed, Bear said. This is for a replacement and for anything else you might need. Rent, groceries, medical bills. Louise shook her head, backing away. I can't take your money. It's not charity, Mrs. Kilpatrick, Bear said. It's a debt repaid. In our world, a debt of blood is absolute. He pressed the envelope into her hands. Your son stood between me and 3 men who wanted to hurt me. He took a beating to protect me. He didn't know me, didn't owe me anything, but he did it anyway. Bear's voice grew quieter. I have a daughter. She's 8 years old. If something had happened to me that day, she would have lost her father. Your son saved both our lives. Louise looked down at the envelope, then at Ezra, then back at Bear. Slowly she took it. Bear nodded. He turned to Ezra. I'll be back tomorrow morning. 6 a.m. We start training then. Training, Ezra asked. You wanted to learn how to fight, Bear said. So we're going to teach you. He climbed back onto his bike, kicked it to life. The roar echoed across the trailer park. As Bear rode away, Louise opened the envelope. Her hand shook. Inside was $8,000 in cash and a note written in neat handwriting for the Kilpatrick family. With honor. Louise sank down onto the aluminum steps of their trailer. The envelope clutched to her chest and wept. Ezra sat beside her, his arm around her shoulders. For the first time in 5 years since his father died, since they'd been thrown into this pit of poverty and struggle, Ezra felt something he had almost forgotten. Hope. 6 weeks changed everything. Every morning at 6 a.m., Ezra stood in the garage behind the Hells Angels clubhouse, his hands wrapped in tape, his body drenched in sweat before the sun had fully risen. Bear taught him to fight, Not bar brawling, not street scrapping, real fighting. How to protect his ribs when someone swung. How to slip a punch instead of taking it full force. How to use his smaller frame as an advantage, getting inside a bigger opponent's reach. The first week, Ezra could barely lift his arms by the end of each session. His muscles screamed, his bruised ribs protested every movement. But he showed up, every single morning. The second week, something shifted. His body began to adapt. The movements became muscle memory. Duck, weave, counter. His reflexes sharpened. By the fourth week, he gained 12 pounds. Not fat, muscle. Real food helped. The charter made sure he ate properly protein and vegetables instead of ramen and whatever expired sandwiches Sterling let him take home from the diner. Bear didn't just teach him to fight. He taught him to think like a fighter, to read body language, to spot when someone was about to swing before their fist moved, to stay calm when adrenaline tried to take over. But more than that, Bear taught him what it meant to be a man. They'd sit in the garage after training both of them exhausted, drinking water and letting their heart rates come down. Bear would talk about his daughter Ruby, 8 years old, all wild curls and gap-toothed smiles. Her mother Elaine had died 4 years ago. Breast cancer. It had eaten through her in 6 months from diagnosis to funeral. Bear had raised Ruby alone ever since, working as a welder during the day, coming home to help with homework, making dinner, braiding hair that he never quite got right, being both mother and father to a little girl who still cried for the parents she'd lost. The diabetes had nearly taken that away from her. "If you hadn't been there," Bear said one morning, his voice quiet, "Ruby would have lost me too. She would have been alone." Ezra didn't know what to say to that, so he said nothing, just listened. "My father taught me something." Bear continued staring at his wrapped hands. "He said a man isn't measured by how hard he can hit. He's measured by what he's willing to stand up for, even when it costs him everything." He met Ezra's gaze. "You stood up when you didn't have to. That defines the man you are. Never forget it." Something settled deep in Ezra's chest, a weight lifting, a truth-taking root. His own father had been gone for 5 years. Connor Kilpatrick had been a good man, hardworking, honest. But he'd been taken too soon, and Ezra had spent those years floundering, trying to figure out how to be a man without anyone to show him. Now sitting in this garage with this Hell's Angel, he was learning. The money from the charter had changed everything at home. Louise paid 6 months of rent in advance, a weight lifted from her shoulders that Ezra could see in the way she stood straighter, smiled easier. She bought her insulin without rationing it for the first time in 2 years. She even bought Ezra new clothes, real jeans instead of thrift store hand-me-downs. But Ezra hadn't taken the money for nothing. Ironside had offered him work at the charter's garage, Ironside Auto, 20 hours a week at $15 an hour. Ezra learned to change oil, rotate tires, diagnose engine problems. He was good at it. His hands, used to careful work from years of washing dishes, adapted quickly to the precision required for mechanical repair. Ironside himself would sometimes stop by the garage watching Ezra work. The old biker didn't say much, but Ezra could feel the weight of his evaluation. This was a test, not of skill, but of character. Would Ezra show up every day? Would he work hard? Would he prove himself worthy of the investment? They'd made Ezra showed up every day, early. On the 7th Saturday, Bear brought Ruby to the clubhouse. She was tiny, all energy and curiosity, her dark curls bouncing as she ran across the garage toward her father. She stopped short when she saw Ezra, her eyes going wide. "Who's that?" she asked, pointing. "That's Ezra," Bear said, kneeling down to her level. "He's the one I told you about. The one who helped Daddy when he was sick." Ruby studied Ezra with the unfiltered intensity only children possess. Then she walked right up to him and hugged his legs. "Thank you for saving my daddy," she said, her voice muffled against his jeans. Ezra froze. He looked down at this little girl, at the trust in her eyes, and felt something crack in his chest. He knelt down, matching her height. "You're welcome," he said softly. Ruby grinned, gap-toothed and bright. She pulled a folded piece of paper from her pocket and handed it to him. "I drew this for you." Ezra unfolded it carefully. It was a crayon drawing of 3 stick figures. One very large labeled Dad, one medium-sized labeled Ezra, one small labeled Me. They were all holding hands. Above them in shaky letters, she'd written, "Family." Ezra's throat tightened. He looked up at Bear, who was watching him with an unreadable expression. Family doesn't mean blood, Bear said quietly, echoing Ironside's words from weeks ago. It means the people willing to stand with you. Ezra carefully folded the drawing and put it in his pocket. I'll keep this forever, he told Ruby. She beamed. From that day forward, Ruby called him Big Brother Easy. And Ezra discovered that protecting someone, truly protecting them, didn't feel like a burden. It felt like purpose. But while Ezra's world was expanding, Chase Calloway's was contracting. Chase had noticed the changes. How could he not? Ezra showed up to campus in new clothes, drove a used but functional Honda Civic that hadn't been there before, walked with his head up instead of hunched over like a kicked dog. And everywhere Chase went, he saw them. Bikers. Not obvious, not threatening, just there. A man in a leather cut drinking coffee at the campus Starbucks, his eyes tracking Chase as he walked past. Another leaning against a Harley in the parking lot outside the football field. A third sitting in the back of the lecture hall during Chase's economics class, arms crossed, staring. They never approached, never said a word. But their presence was a message clear as a shout. Touch Ezra Kilpatrick again, and you answer to us. Chase's confidence began to fray. He'd spent his whole life being untouchable. The star quarterback, the rich kid, the one who got away with everything because his father owned the town. But these men didn't care about any of that. He tried to ignore them, tried to focus on football, on his upcoming transfer to USC, on maintaining the image of the Golden Boy. But the fear was always there, a cold weight in his stomach. Finally, Chase broke. He went to his father. Vaughn Calloway's office sat on the top floor of the tallest building in downtown Bakersfield. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city, a kingdom Vaughn had built through ruthless ambition and dirty deals. Vaughn was 52, silver-haired, impeccably dressed, in a suit that cost more than most people's monthly rent. He sat behind a massive mahogany desk reviewing contracts when Chase burst in. "We need to talk," Chase said, his voice tight. Vaughn looked up, one eyebrow raised. About the bikers who are following me everywhere." Vaughn's expression didn't change. "Sit down." Chase set his leg, bouncing with nervous energy. "Some biker trash is harassing me," Chase said. "They're stalking me, at school, at practice, everywhere. It's because of that kid from the diner, the one who got in my way." Vaughn set down his pen. "Ezra Kilpatrick. You know about him?" "I know everything that happens in this city," Vaughn said coldly. "And I know you attacked him. Twice. Once at Locke's Diner, once at the community college parking lot." Chase's face flushed. "He started it. He got between me and..." "Yeah, I don't care," Vaughn interrupted. "What I care about is that you were stupid enough to leave witnesses, to give them ammunition." He stood walking to the window, hands clasped behind his back. "Do you know who those bikers are?" Vaughn asked. "Hell's Angels." "Bakersfield Hell's Angels," Vaughn corrected. "Randall Kavanaugh's charter. And they don't play games." He turned to face Chase. "You put yourself in their crosshairs. Now I have to clean up your mess." Chase swallowed. "What are you going to do?" Vaughn picked up his phone, dialed a number from memory. It rang twice before a voice answered. "Chief Pike." "Douglas," Vaughn said smoothly. "We have a problem." Chase listened as his father laid out the situation. The Hells Angels, the harassment, the threat to his son's safety and future. "I need you to handle this," Vaughn said. "Crack down on them. Find a reason. I don't care what it is, but get them off my son's back." There was a pause. Then Pike's voice hesitant. "Vaughn, I can try, but the Angels are careful. They don't give me much to work with." "Then make something up," Vaughn said, his voice hardening. "I fund your campaign. I got you elected. And I can get you unelected just as easily. Do you understand?" Another pause. "Yes." "Good." Vaughn hung up. He looked at Chase. "Stay away from the Kilpatrick kid. Don't look at him. Don't talk to him. Don't even think about him. Let me handle this." Chase nodded, relief flooding through him. But as he left his father's office, he couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over. It wasn't. 3 days later, at 2 in the morning, Kern County Sheriff's deputies raided the Hells Angels clubhouse. They came with warrants, searched every room, tore apart the garage, questioned every member present. They found 2 unregistered firearms belonging to newer prospects, men who'd been patched in less than a year. Both were arrested on the spot. Ironside watched from the doorway as the deputies loaded the two men into cruisers. His face was carved from stone, showing nothing. But behind his eyes, calculations were already forming. This wasn't random. This was targeted. And he knew exactly who was behind it. When the deputies finally left Ironside, called a meeting. 20 members gathered in the main room. Bear stood to Ironside's right, his massive arms crossed. The mood was tense, angry. Vaughn Calloway did this, Ironside said without preamble. He leaned on Chief Pike. This is retaliation for us protecting Ezra. Murmurs rippled through the room, hands clenched into fists. We hit back, someone said from the back. Show them they can't mess with us. No, Ironside said sharply. Voices fell silent. That's what they want, an excuse to come down harder, to paint us as the criminals. He looked around the room, meeting each man's eyes. We're not playing their game. We're playing ours. And our game is longer, smarter. He turned to Bear. We need to know everything about Vaughn Calloway. Every dirty deal, every bribe, every corner he's cut. If he's coming for us, we're taking him down. Legally. Bear nodded. I know someone who can help. The next day, Bear made a call. Maria Ortega answered on the third ring. She was 35, a former detective with the Bakersfield Police Department. She'd been good at her job. Too good. When she'd started asking questions about irregularities in evidence handling, about cases that disappeared, about certain names that kept appearing in sealed files, she'd been quietly forced out. Vaughn Calloway's name had been one of those that appeared too often. Maria had turned private investigator after leaving the force. She took cases the police wouldn't touch. She had no love for corrupt power. When Bear explained the situation, there was a long silence on the other end of the line. Vaughn Calloway, she finally said, I've been waiting for someone to go after him for years. Will you help us? On one condition, Maria said. When we take him down, it's by the book. Legal, clean, no shortcuts. I'm not risking my license or my freedom. Agreed. Then I'm in. Maria started digging immediately. Bank records, property transfers, corporate filings. She had connections, former colleagues who owed her favors, who were willing to quietly slip her information. Within a week, she had something. She met with Ironside and Bear at a diner across town, far from anyone who might recognize them. She slid a folder across the table. Sunset Gardens, she said. It's a housing development Vaughn built 5 years ago, 300 units, low-income housing supposedly. Ironside opened the folder. Inside were documents, maps, environmental reports. He built it on contaminated land, Maria continued. Former industrial site, heavy metals in the soil, benzene, trichloroethylene. The EPA flagged it, required remediation before any residential construction. But he built anyway, Bear said. Worse, Maria said. He bribed the city planning director to approve the project without the environmental clearance. $2.4 million routed through shell companies. She tapped another document, and he hid the contamination reports. The residents living there have no idea they're being poisoned. Ironside's jaw tightened. How many people? 800, including 200 children. The table was silent. Bear's hands curled into fists. We bury him with this. Not yet, Ironside said. We need more. One project he can claim ignorance. We need a pattern. Maria nodded. I'll keep digging. As they left the diner, Bear pulled Ironside aside. What about Ezra? Does he know what's happening? Not yet, Ironside said. But he will. This is his fight too. That evening, Ezra was finishing up at the garage when Bear found him. We need to talk, Bear said. They sat outside on the hood of an old Chevy, the sun setting behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of amber and purple. Bear explained everything. The raid, Vaughn's involvement, the investigation into his business dealings. Ezra listened in silence, his face unreadable. When Bear finished, Ezra was quiet for a long moment. He's not going to stop, Ezra finally said. As long as I'm protected by the charter, he's going to keep coming after you. After all of you. That's not your problem, Bear said. Yes, it is, Ezra said, turning to face him. You've done so much for me, but I can't keep letting you fight my battles. This isn't just your battle anymore, Bear said. Vaughn Calloway is dirty. He's hurt people. Lots of people. Taking him down isn't about you. It's about justice. Ezra shook his head. I know, but Chase is still my problem. And as long as he's focused on me, your focus is split. He took a breath. I need you to pull back, Ezra said. Bear stared at him. What? The protection, the watching. I need you to stop. Are you insane? Bear's voice rose. They'll kill you. No, Ezra said calmly. They'll try. But I'm not the same person I was 6 weeks ago. You taught me to fight. You taught me to think. Now let me use it. Conflict warred across Bear's weathered features, anger wrestling with fear, both shadowed by reluctant pride. If I do this, Bear said slowly, and something happens to you, I'll never forgive myself. If you don't do this, Ezra countered, I'll never forgive myself. I need to stand on my own. You said it yourself, a man is measured by what he's willing to stand up for. Let me stand. Bear looked away, his jaw working. Finally, he nodded. 2 weeks. You get 2 weeks to handle this your way. After that, if Chase hasn't backed off, we're stepping back in. Non-negotiable. Ezra extended his hand. Deal. They shook on it. The next morning, the bikers were gone. Chase noticed immediately. The man at Starbucks wasn't there. The Harley in the parking lot was absent. The lecture hall watcher had vanished. For the first time in weeks, Chase felt like he could breathe. He told himself it was over. The bikers had gotten bored, or scared, or realized they were messing with the wrong family. But deep down, he knew better. And his instincts were right. Because Ezra Kilpatrick wasn't waiting to be saved anymore. He was planning. Ezra spent the first week watching, learning patterns. Chase had a routine, football practice every afternoon from 3 to 6, fraternity house most evenings, classes Tuesday and Thursday mornings. But there were gaps, moments when Chase was alone, vulnerable. Ezra also spent time at the county recorder's office. Public records were free to access. Property deeds, business licenses, tax assessments. He started with Oak Hills Trailer Park, the place he and his mother called home. It had been family-owned for 30 years by the Morrison family, but 3 months ago it had been sold to a company called Sunridge Holdings, LLC. Ezra dug deeper. Sunridge Holdings had no public officers listed, no business address beyond a P.O. box, a shell company. He cross-referenced the sale price, $2.1 million for a property appraised at $3.8 million just 2 years prior. Someone had gotten a sweetheart deal, and Ezra had a pretty good idea who. He made copies of everything, took them home, spread them across the tiny kitchen table in the trailer. Louise watched him work, concern etched on her face. What are you doing, baby? She asked. Learning, Ezra said. Learning how men like Vaughn Calloway operate. This is dangerous. Living is dangerous, Mom, Ezra said, not looking up from the documents. At least this way I'm fighting back. On the 10th day, Ezra made his move. He went to campus, found Chase coming out of the athletics center after practice, duffel bag slung over his shoulder. Chase stopped when he saw Ezra walking toward him. Trent and Mason weren't with him. He was alone. Chase's hand tightened on his bag, but Ezra didn't look afraid. He looked calm, focused. What do you want? Chase said, trying to sound tough. But there was an edge of uncertainty in his voice. To talk, Ezra said. He stopped a few feet away, hands visible, non-threatening. I don't have anything to say to you. Then just listen, Ezra said. The bikers are gone. You noticed right. Chase didn't answer. I asked them to step back, Ezra continued, because this isn't their fight. It's ours, you and me. There is no you and me, Chase spat. You're nothing. Maybe, Ezra said, but I'm the nothing who's still standing. You hit me twice, destroyed my bike, tried to break me, and I'm still here. He took a step closer. Chase's hand went to his pocket, fingers curling around his keys as a makeshift weapon. Here's what's going to happen, Ezra said, his voice level. You're going to leave me alone, not because you're scared of the bikers, because you're going to realize that every time you come after me, I'm going to be ready. And eventually you're going to slip up in front of the wrong person, with the wrong witness, and no amount of your daddy's money will save you. Chase's face reddened. You threatening me? No, Ezra said. I'm giving you a choice. Walk away, move on with your life, or keep pushing and find out what happens when someone finally pushes back. For a long moment, they stared at each other. Then Ezra turned and walked away. Chase stood there, trembling with rage, humiliation burning through him. He pulled out his phone, texted his father. The biker protection is gone. Kid just confronted me. Alone. What do I do? The response came 2 minutes later. Stay away from him, I'm handling it. But Chase had spent 20 years getting everything he wanted, being told no, being challenged, being made to feel small. It ignited something ugly inside him. He wasn't going to walk away. He was going to end this on his terms. Chase spent the next 3 days planning. He didn't tell Trent or Mason. This was personal. Something he needed to do himself, to prove he wasn't weak, to prove he wasn't afraid. He knew Ezra's schedule, knew the kid worked late shifts at Locke's Diner on Friday nights, knew he'd be closing up alone around 11:30. Chase parked his truck 2 blocks away, grabbed the aluminum baseball bat from the back seat, walked through the shadows toward the diner. The alley behind Locke's was dark, lit only by a single flickering bulb above the back door. Perfect. Chase waited. At 11:40, the back door opened. Ezra stepped out, carrying a heavy trash bag. He walked to the dumpster, tossed it in. Chase stepped out of the shadows. Hey, hero. Ezra turned. He saw Chase, saw the bat, but he didn't run. You just can't help yourself, can you? Ezra said quietly. I'm done being afraid of you, Chase said, raising the bat. Done being humiliated. This ends tonight. You're right, Ezra said. It does. Chase charged forward, swinging the bat in a wide arc. Ezra moved. Not panicked, controlled. He'd practiced this 100 times with Bear. Dodge, don't try to block a weapon. Create distance. The bat whistled past Ezra's head, missing by inches. Chase swung again. This time Ezra ducked, felt the air move above him. Third swing. Ezra stepped inside Chase's reach, too close for the bat to be effective. But Chase was bigger, stronger. He dropped the bat, grabbed Ezra, and threw him against the brick wall. Ezra's shoulder hit hard. Pain exploded down his arm. Chase grabbed the bat again, raised it high, but before he could bring it down, the alley flooded with light. Blinding white headlights. Multiple vehicles. Chase spun, shielding his eyes. 3 police cruisers blocked both ends of the alley. Doors opened. Officers stepped out, hands on their weapons. Drop the weapon, one of them shouted. Now! Chase's face went white. The bat slipped from his fingers, clattering on the concrete. An officer Ezra didn't recognize approached. His name tag read Jenkins. He was young, maybe 30, with sharp eyes. Ezra Kilpatrick, Jenkins asked. Yes, sir. You called 911 30 minutes ago, said you were going to be attacked at this location. Chase's head whipped toward Ezra. You what? Ezra met his eyes. I told you I'd be ready. Jenkins pulled out his handcuffs. Chase Calloway, you're under arrest for assault with a deadly weapon. No, Chase breathed. No, my father will... Your father isn't here, Jenkins said, snapping the cuffs onto Chase's wrists, and he can't help you this time. As Jenkins led Chase toward the cruiser, the back door of the diner opened again. Sterling Locke stepped out holding a small black device. Officer, Sterling called. I have something for you. He walked over and handed Jenkins a USB drive. What's this? Jenkins asked. Security footage, Sterling said. New camera system, installed 2 weeks ago. Covers the entire alley. Everything that just happened is on there, clear as day. Jenkins took the drive, nodding. Thank you, sir. He looked at Ezra. You'll need to come down to the station. Give a statement. I will, Ezra said. As the cruisers pulled away, Chase visible in the back seat, face pressed against the window, Ezra finally let out the breath he'd been holding. Sterling put a hand on his shoulder. You planned this, the old man said. It wasn't a question. Yes. The camera, the 911 call, all of it. Yes. Sterling was quiet for a moment. Then he squeezed Ezra's shoulder. Your father would be proud of you, son. Ezra's throat tightened. He nodded, not trusting himself to speak. In the distance, a phone rang. Vaughn Calloway answered on the first ring, expecting good news, expecting to hear that his son had handled the problem. Instead, he heard his lawyer's voice tight with stress. Vaughn, we have a situation. Chase has been arrested. Assault with his deadly weapon. There's video evidence, multiple witnesses. I can't make this go away. Vaughn's hand tightened on the phone until his knuckles went white. Get him out on bail, he said, his voice cold. Whatever it costs. I'll try, but Vaughn, this is serious. If he's convicted, he won't be, Vaughn interrupted. I'll make sure of it. He hung up, sat in silence in his dark office, the city lights glittering below him. For the first time in his life, Vaughn Calloway felt something he wasn't used to feeling: fear. Because 30 minutes before his lawyer's call, he'd received an email from an anonymous sender. Subject line: "You should see this." Attached were documents, property records, environmental reports, bank transfers, everything about Sunset Gardens. And at the bottom, a single line of text: "More to come." The walls started closing in on Vaughn Calloway the moment Chase was processed into county lockup. Bail was set at $50,000. Vaughn paid it within an hour. But the damage was done. The arrest was public record. The video footage somehow had already leaked to local news. By morning, every station in Kern County was running the story. Star quarterback arrested for assault. Video shows attack with baseball bat. Victim had called police in advance, predicting the assault. Chase came home in silence, his face hollow, his hands still red from where the cuffs had been. He went straight to his room and didn't come out. Vaughn stood in his home office, staring at the anonymous email on his computer screen. The Sunset Gardens documents sat open in front of him, each page a potential felony charge. Fraud, bribery, reckless endangerment, environmental crimes. Someone was coming for him, and for the first time in 30 years of cutting corners and crushing opponents, Vaughn didn't know who. He picked up his phone, called his head of security, a former cop named Driscoll. "I need you to find out who sent this," Vaughn said, forwarding the email. "Trace it. I don't care what it costs." Driscoll called back 2 hours later. "It's routed through multiple VPN servers, offshore, anonymous remailers. Whoever sent this knows what they're doing. Professional level." Vaughn hung up without another word. He sat in the dark, the city lights sprawling below his penthouse office, and for the first time wondered if he'd finally pushed too hard, hurt too many people, made too many enemies. While Vaughn spiraled, Ezra sat across from Officer Jenkins at the Kern County Sheriff's Station giving a statement. Jenkins was different from the Bakersfield police. He worked for the county, not the city. Chief Pike had no authority over him. And more importantly, Jenkins had a reputation for being clean, straight, the kind of cop who didn't take bribes. "Walk me through it again," Jenkins said, pen poised over his notepad. "You called 911 before the attack happened. How did you know Chase Calloway would be there?" "He'd been threatening me for weeks," Ezra said calmly, "after the incident at the diner after he destroyed my bicycle. I knew he wasn't going to let it go, so I paid attention, learned his patterns, and I set up an opportunity for him to think I was vulnerable." Jenkins raised an eyebrow. "You baited him." "I gave him a choice," Ezra corrected. "I confronted him earlier in the week, told him to walk away. He chose not to. And the camera, I asked Mr. Locke to install it 2 weeks ago. I paid for it myself. $399 from my paycheck at the garage." Jenkins wrote this down. "You're 18 years old." Yes, sir. "And you outsmarted a 20-year-old college athlete with wealthy parents and a history of getting away with things." Ezra met his eyes. "I learned from good teachers." Jenkins studied him for a long moment. Then he closed his notepad. "This case is airtight," he said. "Video evidence. Your 911 call timestamped 30 minutes before the attack. Multiple witnesses. Chase Calloway is going down for this." He paused. "But you should know something. Vaughn Calloway is going to come after you now. Not his son. Him. And he doesn't play by the rules." "Neither do I," Ezra said quietly. "Not anymore." Jenkins nodded slowly. "Be careful, kid." Ezra left the station just after 1 a.m. Bear was waiting outside, leaning against his Harley. "You called him," Ezra said. "Sterling called me," Bear replied. "Said you handled Chase. I wanted to see for myself that you were okay." "I'm okay." Bear looked him over. Saw the scrape on Ezra's shoulder where he'd hit the wall, but otherwise no injuries. His eyes were clear, focused. "You did good," Bear said. "Usantam." "Real good. You didn't just defend yourself. You controlled the whole situation from start to finish." "You taught me that," Ezra said. "I taught you how to fight, but this," Bear gestured back toward the station, "this was all you. Strategy, patience, that's not something I can teach. You either have it or you don't." They stood in the parking lot, the desert wind cool against their faces. "What happens now?" Bear asked. "Now," Ezra said, "I go after his father." Bear's expression shifted. "Ezra, he's not going to stop," Ezra interrupted. "You know it, I know it. Chase going to jail isn't enough. Vaughn will keep coming, At me, at Mom, at the charter. He has to be stopped. We're already working on that, Bear said. Maria's been digging. We've got Sunset Gardens. We're building a case. It's not enough, Ezra said. One development he can claim ignorance. Blame a subordinate. You need a pattern, and I think I found one. Bear straightened. What did you find? Oak Hills Trailer Park. Where I live? Vaughn bought it 3 months ago through a shell company. Paid $2.1 million for a property worth $3.8 million. Someone approved that sale. Someone in the county assessor's office. Bear's eyes narrowed. You got proof. Public records. I made copies. Ezra pulled a folded stack of papers from his jacket. But there's more. I think this is how he operates. Shell companies. Undervalued properties. Bribes to get them approved. He's been doing it for years. We need to show this to Ironside, Bear said. Tonight. 20 minutes later, they stood in the clubhouse. Ironside sat at the head of the table, the documents spread before him. Maria Ortega stood to his left, already on her phone, pulling up records, cross-referencing. This is good, Maria said, scrolling through her tablet. Really good. If he did this with Oak Hills, he's probably done it elsewhere. She looked up at Ezra. How did you know to look for this? My mom and I got a notice last week, Ezra said. Rent increase? 30%. I thought it was strange. The park's been family-owned forever, same rates for years. Then suddenly new ownership and everything changes. So I checked who bought it. Ironside leaned back in his chair, his fingers steepled. You did this on your own. No one told you to investigate. No, sir. Why, Ezra met his gaze. Because you taught me that a man stands up for what's right. And Vaughn Calloway has been crushing people in this town for decades. It's time someone stood up to him. Ironside was quiet for a long moment. Then he nodded. Maria, he said, I want you to dig into every property transaction Vaughn Calloway has made in the last 20 years. Focus on the ones that went through shell companies. Find the pattern. On it, Maria said. Bear, reach out to Sterling Locke. I want to talk to him. Alone. Bear nodded. Ironside turned back to Ezra. You just declared war on one of the most powerful men in this county. You understand that, yes, sir, and you're ready for what comes next. Ezra thought about his father bleeding out on a construction site owned by Calloway Developments, about his mother rationing insulin because she couldn't afford the full dose, about every person in this town who'd been stepped on, used up, and thrown away by men like Vaughn. I'm ready, Ezra said. The next morning, Vaughn Calloway's world began to collapse in earnest. First, the calls started coming in. Reporters, lots of them, asking about Sunset Gardens, about environmental contamination, about bribes to city officials. Vaughn's PR team went into damage control mode. No comment, no comment, no comment. But the questions kept coming, and they were too specific, too detailed. Someone had fed the media everything. Then the real blow landed. At 10 a.m., 2 FBI agents walked into Calloway Development's headquarters. They had warrants, multiple warrants, for financial records, property transactions, email servers, everything. Vaughn's lawyers tried to delay, tried to negotiate, but the warrants were federal. Ironclad. By noon, agents were carrying out boxes of documents, dozens of them. Vaughn watched from his office window, his hands shaking. His phone rang. Unknown number. He almost didn't answer, but something made him pick up. Mr. Calloway. The voice was male, older, calm. My name is Randall Kavanaugh. Believe you know who I am. Vaughn's blood ran cold. What do you want? To talk, face to face, today, 2 p.m. your office. I'm not meeting with you. Yes, you are, Ironside said. Because if you don't, the rest of what we have goes straight to the FBI. And trust me, what they got this morning is just the beginning. The line went dead. Vaughn sat motionless for 10 minutes. Then he called his head of security. I need the office swept for bugs, and I need 3 bodyguards in the room with me at 2 p.m. At precisely 2 o'clock, Ironside walked into Vaughn Calloway's office. He wasn't alone. Bear walked beside him, massive and silent. And behind them, impossibly, was Ezra Kilpatrick. Vaughn's 3 bodyguards tensed hands, moving toward concealed weapons. Easy, Ironside said, his voice calm. We're not here for violence. We're here to talk. He walked to Vaughn's desk, pulled out a chair, and sat down without invitation. Bear remained standing, arms crossed. Ezra stood behind Ironside, his face unreadable. Vaughn stared at the 18-year-old who'd somehow orchestrated all of this. You, Vaughn said, his voice tight, you're behind this. Not just him, Ironside said, but he started it, found the first thread, pulled it, and discovered that your entire empire is built on fraud. He placed a folder on Vaughn's desk, slid it across. Open it. Vaughn's hands trembled as he opened the folder. Inside were documents, property records, bank transfers, shell company registrations, 14 different transactions over 15 years, all following the same pattern. Undervalued sales, bribes to county officials, environmental violations. This is everything, Ironside said. Every dirty deal you've made since 2011. The FBI has some of it. We have the rest. Vaughn looked up, his face ashen. What do you want? Justice, Ezra said. His voice cut through the room, clear and strong. Vaughn's eyes locked onto him. You have no idea what you're doing, kid. You think you can take me down? I own this town. I own the police. I own the judges. You don't own me, Ezra interrupted. And you don't own them. He gestured to Ironside and Bear. And you don't own the 800 people living in Sunset Gardens who are being poisoned because you were too greedy to do the right thing. Vaughn's jaw clenched. Ironside leaned forward. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to withdraw all charges and false claims against Ezra Kilpatrick. You're going to sell Oak Hills Trailer Park back to the Residents Association at the original purchase price of $1.8 million. You're going to publicly apologize to every person you have defrauded and offer restitution. And you're going to let your son face the consequences of his actions, Ezra added. No lawyers, no bribes, no making it go away. Chase Calloway is going to answer for what he did. Vaughn laughed. It was a bitter, broken sound. And if I refuse, Ironside stood, then the FBI gets everything we held back. The recordings of your phone calls with Chief Pike, the emails with the county assessor, the offshore accounts, all of it. He leaned over the desk, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. You'll spend the next 20 years in federal prison. Your company will be dissolved, your assets seized. Your name will become synonymous with corruption and greed, and your son will grow up knowing his father chose pride over him. Vaughn stared at the folder, at the evidence of his crimes laid bare. How long do I have? He asked quietly. 24 hours, Ironside said. After that, we release everything. They turned and walked toward the door. Ezra paused at the threshold, looked back at Vaughn. You asked why I did this, Ezra said. My father died on one of your construction sites. Connor Kilpatrick. 5 years ago, you didn't pay his medical bills. You didn't compensate my mother. You declared bankruptcy and walked away. And you probably don't even remember his name. Vaughn's face flickered with something. Recognition, maybe. Or guilt. I remember now, Ezra said softly. And that's why I'm doing this. Not for revenge, but because men like you need to learn that you can't just destroy people and walk away. Eventually, someone stands up. He followed Ironside and Bear out of the office. The door closed with a soft click. Vaughn sat alone in his office as the sun set behind the mountains. He opened his desk drawer, pulled out a bottle of scotch and a glass, poured, drank. And then for the first time in 30 years, Vaughn Calloway picked up his phone and called his son. Chase, he said when the boy answered, we need to talk. 3 months later, the transformation was complete. Chase Calloway pled guilty to assault with a deadly weapon. The judge, unswayed by expensive lawyers or family connections, sentenced him to 3 years supervised probation and 1,000 hours of community service. Chase's football scholarship to USC was revoked. His fraternity expelled him. He moved back home, a ghost of his former self. But his community service changed something. He was assigned to Hope Harbor Rehabilitation Center, a facility for people recovering from addiction, homelessness, trauma. People who'd been ground down by the same system that had elevated Chase his entire life. For the first time, Chase saw what real struggle looked like. And slowly, painfully, something in him began to shift. 6 months into his service, he wrote a letter to Ezra. It was 5 pages long, handwritten, full of apologies and acknowledgments of harm done. Ezra received it, read it once, and put it in a drawer. He didn't respond, but he didn't throw it away either. Vaughn Calloway avoided prison. Barely. He'd signed the agreement, met every demand Ironside and Ezra had made. But the FBI investigation continued. In the end, he was forced to sell Calloway, Development's Pay, $14 million in restitution to defrauded parties and accept a 10-year ban from real estate development in California. His empire crumbled. His name, once spoken with respect and fear, became a cautionary tale. He saw his son occasionally. Awkward dinners where neither knew what to say. But there was something there now, something that hadn't existed before, an understanding maybe of what they'd both lost and what might still be salvaged. For Ezra and his mother, life transformed in ways they'd never imagined. Louise Kilpatrick kept her job as lead accountant at Locke's Diner. Sterling had given her a raise, full health benefits, and a retirement plan. For the first time in years, she could afford her insulin without rationing. She could save money. She could breathe. Oak Hills Trailer Park was purchased by the residents through a cooperative loan program Maria Ortega helped arrange. Rent decreased by 30%. Repairs were made. The place began to look less like desperation and more like a community. Ezra continued working at Ironside Auto Garage. His pay increased to $24 an hour when he proved he could handle complex engine diagnostics. Ironside himself took Ezra under his wing, teaching him not just mechanics, but business, how to negotiate, how to manage people, how to build something that lasted. And Ezra transferred his major from business to criminal justice. His goal: become a lawyer, specifically a public defender, someone who fought for people who couldn't afford to fight for themselves. When Sterling Locke heard about this, he pulled Ezra aside one evening after closing. "Your father would be proud," the old man said, his voice rough with emotion. "Connor was a good man, the best I knew, and you're just like him, but stronger, because you learned to fight back." Sterling reached into his pocket and pulled out a worn photograph. It showed a younger Sterling standing beside another man, late 30s, work clothes, broad smile. "That's my father," Sterling said. "Richard Locke. In 1994, Richard Calloway, Vaughn's father, who died in 2010, swindled my dad out of our family farm. Used the same tricks Vaughn used. Shell companies, bribes, undervalued sales. My father lost everything. He killed himself 2 years later." Sterling's hand shook slightly as he held the photograph. "I've been waiting 32 years for someone to take the Calloways down. I'd given up hope, thought they were untouchable." He looked at Ezra, his old eyes bright with unshed tears. "Then you walked into my diner, scrawny kid with nothing, and you stood up anyway. You didn't just save that biker's life, you saved mine. Gave me justice I thought I'd never see." He pressed the photograph into Ezra's hand. "Keep this. Remember that what you did mattered, to more people than you'll ever know." Ezra held the photograph carefully, his throat tight. "Thank you," he whispered. On a warm Saturday in October, the Hells Angels Bakersfield Charter held a gathering at the clubhouse. 50 members and their families filled the yard. Barbecue smoke rose from massive grills. Children ran through the grass, laughing. Music played from speakers mounted on the garage. Ezra arrived with his mother, both of them carrying dishes Louise had spent all morning preparing. Ruby spotted him immediately and came running, throwing her arms around his waist. "Big brother, easy," she shouted. "Look, I lost another tooth." She grinned, showing a new gap in her smile. Ezra laughed, lifting her up. "That means the tooth fairy's coming. Daddy says the tooth fairy gives extra for brave kids." "Then you're getting a fortune," Ezra said. Bear approached, a rare smile on his weathered face. He clapped Ezra on the shoulder, careful not to knock him over. "Good to see you, brother." "You too." They walked together toward the center of the gathering where Ironside stood talking with several senior members. When he saw Ezra, he raised his hand, calling for attention. The gathering stilled. "Brothers and sisters," Ironside said, his voice carrying across the yard, "we're here today to celebrate family. Not the kind you're born into, but the kind you choose. The kind you build through loyalty, respect, and sacrifice." He gestured to Ezra. "6 months ago, this young man walked into our lives. He saved Bear's life when he had every reason to walk away. He stood up to bullies when he had no protection. And he took down one of the most corrupt men in this county using nothing but intelligence, courage, and an unshakable sense of right and wrong." Ironside pulled something from his cut, a leather jacket, black and worn with patches carefully sewn on. "Ezra Kilpatrick," Ironside said. The Bakersfield Charter doesn't give this lightly. This isn't membership. You're not a Hell's Angel, and we're not asking you to be. This is something else, something rarer. He held up the jacket. On the back, carefully embroidered, were the words, "Road Brother, Kilpatrick, honor above all." "This means your family," Ironside continued. "Forever, no matter where you go or what you do, you'll always have a place here. You'll always have brothers willing to stand with you." He handed the jacket to Ezra. Ezra took it with trembling hands. He looked at the patches, the stitching, the care that had gone into making this. "I don't know what to say," Ezra said, his voice cracking. "Then don't say anything," Bear said softly. "Just wear it and know what it means." Ezra slipped the jacket on. It fit perfectly. The gathered crowd erupted in applause. Fists pounded on tables. Voices shouted approval. Louise stood to the side, tears streaming down her face, her hand pressed to her mouth. Ironside raised his hand again. Voices fell silent once more. "One more thing," he said. He looked at Ezra. "You got something to say to everyone." Ezra hadn't prepared anything. But standing there surrounded by these men and women who had taken him in, protected him, taught him, he found the words. "When my father died," Ezra began, his voice quiet but steady, "I thought I'd lost the only person who would ever teach me what it meant to be a man. I was 13, angry, lost." He looked around at the faces watching him. "I spent 5 years trying to figure it out on my own, trying to carry weight I wasn't strong enough to carry, trying to be something I didn't understand." His eyes found Bear, then Ironside, then Sterling standing near the back. "You all taught me something my father didn't get the chance to. You taught me that being a man isn't about being the biggest or the strongest or the richest. It's about standing up when it costs you everything. It's about protecting people who can't protect themselves. It's about choosing honor over comfort." He touched the patch on his jacket. "And you taught me that family isn't just blood. It's the people who see you at your worst and choose to stand with you anyway." His voice broke slightly. "My father said a man is measured by the moments he stands up, not the moments he falls down. I fell down a lot, got beaten, got broken, but every time you helped me stand back up, and you taught me how to stand on my own." He looked at Louise, who was openly crying now. "I understand now, Dad," Ezra said softly. "I understand what you meant." The silence that followed was profound. Even the children had stopped playing, sensing the weight of the moment. Then Bear stepped forward and pulled Ezra into a crushing embrace. "Proud of you, brother," he said quietly. "So damn proud." One by one the members came forward, shook Ezra's hand, clapped his shoulder, welcomed him fully into the fold. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, Ezra found himself sitting on the hood of an old truck with Ruby on one side and Louise on the other. Bear stood nearby, talking with Ironside, both of them occasionally glancing over with satisfaction. "Are you happy, baby?" Louise asked softly. Ezra thought about the question. 6 months ago, he'd been alone, terrified, drowning in a system designed to crush people like him. He'd had nothing but a broken bicycle and bruised ribs and a desperate hope that someone somewhere might help. Now he had family, real family. He had purpose. He had a future that didn't look like an endless grind just to survive. "Yeah, Mom," Ezra said. "I'm happy." Ruby leaned against his side. "Big brother Easy, will you always be here?" "Always," Ezra promised. "I'm not going anywhere." As the stars began to emerge in the darkening sky, as the sounds of laughter and music filled the air, Ezra Kilpatrick sat surrounded by the people who'd saved him. And he realized that in saving him, they taught him how to save himself. 2 years passed. Ezra Kilpatrick, now 20 years old, stood in front of a mirror in the small apartment he shared with his mother. The place was modest but clean, worlds away from the crumbling trailer they'd left behind. Louise hummed in the kitchen, preparing breakfast, her health stable for the first time in years. Ezra adjusted his tie. He wasn't used to wearing one. The button-down shirt felt stiff against his skin, so different from the grease-stained work clothes or the leather jacket that hung on the back of his door. Today was his first day as a student intern at the Kern County Public Defender's Office. He was a junior now at California State University, Bakersfield, majoring in criminal justice with a minor in political science. His grades were near perfect. Not because things came easy, but because he worked harder than anyone else. Every paper, every exam, Every presentation, he approached them the way Bear had taught him to approach a fight: prepared, focused, relentless. The scholarship from the Hells Angels, officially called the Connor Kilpatrick Memorial Fund, covered his tuition. Ironside had insisted. The charter had voted unanimously to establish it not just for Ezra, but for other kids from Oak Hills and similar places who needed a hand up. Ezra grabbed his backpack, kissed his mother on the cheek, and headed out. The public defender's office was housed in a tired building downtown, its halls filled with overworked attorneys carrying case files that never seemed to shrink. Ezra's supervisor was Patricia Monroe, a 45-year-old woman with sharp eyes and graying hair pulled back in a no-nonsense bun. "You must be Ezra," she said, extending her hand. "Welcome. I've heard good things about you from Professor Chen." "Thank you, ma'am," Ezra said. "Don't call me ma'am. Makes me feel old. Patricia's fine." She handed him a stack of files. "These are intake interviews. Low-level offenses, petty theft, trespassing, possession. I need you to review them, pull out the key facts, and flag anything that doesn't add up." Ezra took the files. "Yes, ma'am." "Yes, Patricia," she smiled. "You'll do fine." He spent the morning reading. Each file was a person, a story. Most of them reminded him of himself 2 years ago. Poor, desperate, caught in a system that didn't care whether they lived or died. One file caught his attention. Marcus Webb, 17 years old, arrested for breaking into a pharmacy. Prior record, none. Attending Bakersfield High School. Single mother, disabled, unable to work. Ezra read the police report. Marcus had smashed the window of a CVS at 2 a.m. He'd taken insulin. Nothing else, just insulin, the diabetic kind of P-man, for his mother. Ezra's hands tightened on the folder. He walked to Patricia's office, knocked on the open door. "Find something?" she asked. "This one," Ezra said, holding up the file. Marcus Webb, he's 17, broke into a pharmacy for insulin. His mother's diabetic. Can't afford it. Patricia sighed. "It's still burglary, Ezra. The law doesn't care why he did it." "But we should," Ezra said. "He's not a criminal. He's a kid trying to keep his mother alive. If we can get him into a diversion program, connect his family with social services, maybe he doesn't end up with a felony record that ruins his life." Patricia finished. She studied Ezra. "You've got personal experience with this." "My mother's diabetic," Ezra said. "There were times we couldn't afford her insulin. I understand what that desperation feels like." Patricia nodded. "All right, you want to help Marcus Webb? Go interview him. Find out his story. Write up a recommendation for diversion. If it's good, I'll take it to the prosecutor." Ezra met with Marcus 2 days later at the Juvenile Detention Center. The kid looked small in his orange jumpsuit, his eyes hollow, his hands shaking slightly as he sat across the table from Ezra. "I'm Ezra Kilpatrick," Ezra said. "I'm working with your public defender. I'm here to help you." Marcus didn't look up. "Nobody can help me. I'm going to jail." "Not if I can prevent it," Ezra said. "But I need you to tell me what happened. All of it." Marcus was silent for a long moment. Then slowly he began to talk. His mother, Teresa Webb, had been diagnosed with type 2 diabetes 3 years ago. She'd been a housekeeper at a hotel, but arthritis had made it impossible to work. She'd lost her job, lost her insurance. They'd burned through their savings, trying to keep up with medication costs. Last month, Teresa had run out of insulin. They'd gone to the pharmacy to buy more. The price, $340. They had $62. The pharmacist had turned them away. 2 days later, Teresa had a diabetic episode, passed out on the kitchen floor. Marcus had called an ambulance. They'd stabilized her at the hospital, but the bill was $8,000. Money they didn't have. The hospital had given Teresa a week's supply of insulin and sent her home. Marcus knew what would happen when that week ran out, so he'd gone to the pharmacy at night, broken the window, taken what his mother needed to survive. "I didn't want to steal," Marcus said, his voice breaking, "but I couldn't let her die." What was I supposed to do? Ezra saw himself in this kid, saw the impossible choices, the crushing weight of responsibility, the system that forced people to choose between morality and survival. "You did what you had to," Ezra said quietly, "and now I'm going to do what I have to. I'm going to fight for you." Ezra spent the next week building Marcus's case. He contacted social services, got Teresa Webb enrolled in Medicaid. He reached out to a nonprofit that provided free diabetes medication. He found Marcus a spot in a youth mentorship program, and he wrote a 20-page brief arguing that Marcus Webb wasn't a threat to society. He was a kid who'd been failed by a system that valued profit over human life. Patricia presented it to the prosecutor. The prosecutor, a man named Garrett Stone, read it in silence. Then he looked up at Patricia. Who wrote this? One of my interns, Ezra Kilpatrick. Stone nodded slowly. It's good, really good. Tell your intern he just saved this kid's life. I'll offer a diversion deal. Probation, community service, no felony. When Ezra told Marcus, the kid broke down crying. Thank you, Marcus said over and over. Thank you. Don't thank me, Ezra said. Just finish school, take care of your mom, and when you get the chance, help someone else the way I helped you. That evening, Ezra sat in the garage at the Hells Angels clubhouse working on an engine rebuild with Bear. Ruby, now 10 years old, sat nearby doing homework. She'd grown taller, her curls still wild, her gap-toothed smile replaced by braces. How was your first week? Bear asked, not looking up from the carburetor he was cleaning. Good, Ezra said. I helped a kid today. Got him into a diversion program. What did he do? Stole insulin for his diabetic mother. Bear stopped working, looked at Ezra. And you saw yourself in him? Yeah. Did you help him because of that or because it was the right thing to do? Ezra thought about it. Both. Bear nodded. That's the answer I wanted to hear. Personal experience makes you compassionate, but compassion without principle is just sentiment. You did good, Ezra. Ruby looked up from her homework. Big Brother Easy is going to be the best lawyer ever. Ezra smiled. I'm going to try Ruby. 6 months later, Ezra stood in a small courtroom watching Marcus Webb graduate from his diversion program. Teresa Webb sat in the front row, healthy and stable on her new medication regimen, crying tears of joy as the judge dismissed all charges against her son. Marcus caught Ezra's eye as he left the courtroom. Mouthed 2 words, thank you. Ezra nodded. Outside, Patricia Monroe waited for him. You did good work on that case, she said. Really good. I talked to the head of our office. When you graduate law school, if you want a job here, it's yours. I'd be honored, Ezra said. Don't be too honored yet, Patricia said with a wry smile. The pay's terrible and the hours are worse, but the work matters, and I think that's what you care about. It is, Ezra said. As he walked back to his car, Ezra's phone buzzed. A text from Chase Calloway. They hadn't spoken in 2 years, but the message was simple. I finished my community service today, 1,000 hours. I wanted you to know I'm enrolling in nursing school, trying to help people instead of hurting them. I don't expect forgiveness, but I wanted to say I'm trying to be better. Thank you for showing me that was possible. Ezra stared at the message for a long time. Then he typed back. Good luck, Chase. Keep going. He hit send. Redemption wasn't about forgetting. It was about choosing every day to be better than yesterday. On a cool evening in November, the Hells Angels held their annual Thanksgiving gathering at the clubhouse. The yard was strung with lights tables laden with food prepared by dozens of hands. Ezra arrived with Louise, both of them carrying pies. Ruby ran up immediately, now tall enough to throw her arms around Ezra's neck instead of his waist. Guess what? She said excitedly. I got an A on my science project. Daddy helped, but I did most of it. That's amazing, Ezra said, setting down the pies to hug her properly. What was it about diabetes because of Daddy's condition? I explained how insulin works and everything. Ezra's throat tightened. He looked over Ruby's head at Bear, who stood nearby with that rare smile on his face. She wanted to understand, Bear said quietly, so she'd know how to help if it ever happened again. You raised her right, Ezra said. We raised her right, Bear corrected, gesturing to include Ezra. You've been part of that, brother. As the evening wore on, Ironside stood to make a toast. Family, he said, raising his glass. Not the one we're born into, but the one we build, the one we choose, the one we fight for. Everyone raised their glasses. To Ezra, Ironside continued, looking directly at him, who came to us broken and alone, who we helped stand up, and who taught us that the strongest among us aren't the ones who never fall. They're the ones who get back up and help others do the same. To Ezra, the crowd echoed. Ezra stood overwhelmed. He raised his own glass. To family, he said, his voice thick. To the people who saved me. and to my father Connor Kilpatrick, who taught me that a man is measured by the moments he stands up. He looked around at the faces watching him. Bear and Ruby, Ironside. Sterling Locke, now 72, but still sharp as ever. Maria Ortega, who'd become a close friend. Louise, healthy and happy. I stand up now, Ezra said, because all of you taught me how. The night ended with Ezra sitting by the fire pit with Bear watching the embers glow. You ever think about what would have happened if you'd walked past me that day? Bear asked. All the time, Ezra admitted. What do you think? I think you would have died, and I would have spent the rest of my life regretting it. Bear nodded. Think about it, too. What would have happened to Ruby if I died that day? Who she would have become without her father? He looked at Ezra. You didn't just save my life, Ezra. You saved hers, too. You gave her a future. You gave me time to watch her grow up. You gave me a future, too, Ezra said. You taught me how to fight, how to stand, how to be a man. They sat in comfortable silence, the fire crackling between them. What's next for you? Bear asked. Law school, Ezra said. I'm applying to UC Davis, UCLA, maybe Stanford, if I can get in. You'll get in, Bear said with certainty. And when you graduate, you're going to change lives. Just like you changed Marcus Webb's. Just like you changed mine. I hope so, Ezra said. I know so, Bear replied. Because that's who you are. That scrawny kid who threw himself over a dying stranger, he's still in there. But now he's got the tools to do even more. Ezra looked down at the Road Brother jacket he wore, at the patch that read honor above all. He'd learned what honor meant, not from books or lectures, but from these men, from this family. Honor meant standing up when it was easier to walk away. Honor meant protecting those who couldn't protect themselves. Honor meant choosing what was right over what was easy. And honor meant passing on what you'd learned, helping the next person who needed it. The jacket on his shoulders wasn't just leather and thread. It was a promise, a legacy, a reminder that one person, no matter how small or weak or broken, could stand up and change everything. Not through violence, not through revenge, but through courage, through compassion, through the simple, radical act of refusing to let others suffer alone. Ezra looked up at the same stars his father had looked at before him, and he understood with crystal clarity what his life was meant to be. He would become a lawyer. He would fight for people like Marcus Webb, like the residents of Sunset Gardens, like everyone crushed under the weight of a system that valued power over justice. He would stand up, and he would teach others to stand with him. Connor Kilpatrick had stood up for others his whole life, and in the end, no one had stood up for him. But his son had learned the lesson, had carried it forward, had turned pain into purpose, fear into courage, isolation into brotherhood. The story didn't end with revenge, it ended with redemption. With a skinny kid from a trailer park becoming the kind of man his father had always hoped he'd be. Strong not because of muscles or money, but because of character, because of choice, because of the unshakable belief that doing the right thing, even when it cost everything, was the only way to live. And as Ezra sat there surrounded by his family wearing a jacket that proclaimed him Road Brother, he knew with absolute certainty that he would never walk alone again. Not because others carried him, but because he'd learned to stand. And in learning to stand, he'd found his purpose to help others do the same.